Our story begins on a rainy roadside where Marcus sought shelter, only to unexpectedly encounter a young girl in a wheelchair. At first, he assumed she needed help, but she simply stared at him with a timid, lingering gaze. After a long hesitation, she carefully pulled out a worn, battered piggy bank and asked if he could be her family, since she had no one left in the world. She wondered, quite earnestly, if her small savings could buy just 2 days of his time. Even 1 day would be enough, she whispered. Looking at her hopeful face, Marcus felt a refusal rising. His own life had recently fallen apart after his parents suddenly passed away. To make matters worse, he'd been fired, his longtime girlfriend had walked out, and even his landlord had thrown him out onto the street. With only $137 left to his name in this cold, indifferent city, he stood, shivering in the downpour, utterly broken. But then, he felt a sudden, gentle poke against the back of his head. Turning around, he saw a hand so slender, he could almost see the veins, clumsily holding an umbrella aloft to shield him from the rain. It was only when he fully turned that he realized his benefactor was the girl in the wheelchair. She looked frail, her cheeks pale, and her hair a mess, and yet nothing could hide her delicate features. The rain was soaking half her body, but she didn't seem to notice, focused entirely on keeping him dry. Watching her struggle to stand just to help him, Marcus couldn't help but feel a wave of self-derision. He never imagined he'd reach a point where he needed the pity of someone even more vulnerable than himself. But before he could even offer his thanks, the girl's wheelchair began to slide backward. He suddenly realized they were standing on a slope. Forgetting the umbrella, he lunged forward as the girl tried desperately to stop the wheels with her hands, which only made the chair accelerate. Fortunately, he managed to catch her at the very last second, though. The umbrella went flying and landed squarely on the poor girl's head. To be honest, it was a perfectly timed disaster. He asked what she was doing out here alone, but immediately regretted it. It sounded far too much like a line from a suspicious stranger. Naturally, the girl seemed to retreat into her shell like a startled kitten, shrinking back into her seat. She stammered that she was just out for a walk. "You should go home," Marcus said. "Your family will be worried." She looked down and whispered that she had no family left. Her grandmother had passed away just yesterday. Marcus realized he had touched a nerve, and a grim realization began to dawn on him. How could a girl in her condition possibly survive on her own? But then, he told himself it wasn't his problem. After all, he could barely keep himself alive. Perhaps it was a sudden pang of guilt that made him hesitate. But as he turned to leave, the girl reached out with her small hand and gripped the corner of his coat. Marcus couldn't help but smile inwardly. She was clearly terrified just talking to a stranger, yet she was still worried about him getting wet in the rain. He suggested she lend him the umbrella. He promised to return it tomorrow, urging her to go home before she ran into someone truly dangerous. The girl looked even more frightened now, and yet she stubbornly refused to let go of his sleeve. It became clear that she was using this clumsy method to make him stay, so he made a decision. He would see her safely to her door before departing. However, when they reached the top floor, he realized her home wasn't actually there. It was even higher up, on a rooftop soaked by the rain. There were no ramps or elevators here, only a set of steep, narrow concrete stairs. The steps stretched upward into the dark, slick with rainwater. We can only imagine the courage it must have taken for a girl who couldn't walk to descend them. Fortunately, she was quite light. Marcus easily carried her and the wheelchair up to the rooftop and reached the entrance. After unlocking the door, the first thing he saw was a black and white photo of a kind-looking elderly woman sitting in the center of the living room. Several bags of trash were piled up near the entryway. After all, simply keeping the place clean was a struggle for her, let alone taking the trash downstairs. The more he realized her limitations, the more his confusion grew. Why would such a timid girl venture out alone in the middle of the night? As he turned to leave, the girl suddenly spoke up in a timid, confused voice. She asked him why he was going. Marcus froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. But when he looked back at her, her clear, innocent gaze chased away any dark thoughts. It was then he realized that her understanding of the world was, well, a bit skewed. She didn't seem to realize how dangerous it was to invite a man home. He leaned down to lecture her, explaining that bringing strangers home was risky, especially a man like him whose background she didn't know. The girl immediately grew tense, looking like a child who had done something wrong. She stammered that he was the very first person she'd ever invited. She added that she was an adult and had an ID card, which was the only sentence she managed to say without stuttering. She was missing the point entirely, of course. Marcus darkened his expression on purpose and made her promise never to bring a stranger home again. But as he turned to go, she grabbed his leg. She argued that if he didn't leave, it wouldn't count as her bringing a stranger home next time. Once she was safely home, Marcus let out a long sigh, feeling a headache coming on from their communication barrier and the heavy weight of her loneliness. He knew he was no saint, and being around a defenseless girl made him worry that his own dark impulses might one day surface. One ruined life was enough. He didn't want his own misery to infect anyone else. He told her he knew she needed company. But even if he stayed today, what about tomorrow or the day after? He explained that he had to work to survive and couldn't stay forever. It was a cruel truth, but he felt she had to learn to face life alone. He watched as her small head drooped lower and lower. Realizing his words were too harsh, he tried to lighten the mood, joking that since no rich woman was supporting him, he was nearly starving. He suggested they talk again once he was back on his feet, but this caused the girl's eyes to light up as she hurried her wheelchair into the bedroom. She returned clutching a worn-out piggy bank, offering to support him with everything she had. To be honest, it wasn't much. Her voice grew smaller as she asked how many days this would cover, clearly aware that this pittance could hardly keep a goldfish alive. Yet she held the jar out stubbornly. Seeing her desperate gamble, Marcus was speechless, but he realized just how dire her situation truly was. This was likely her last bit of savings. If he left her now, she could starve to death in this room without anyone ever noticing. With a serious expression, he asked her to tell the truth about her parents. She whispered that they didn't want her anymore. They had moved abroad, and she couldn't even reach her grandmother. Our protagonist's stern tone was clearly starting to frighten her. She stammered through her answers, trembling, while Marcus felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over him. When he didn't respond, she stubbornly lifted the heavy piggy bank again. Her arms were clearly aching by now, but she kept her eyes locked onto his. She asked if she could buy 2 days of his time, or even just one. He gently explained that people aren't for sale. She seemed confused, noting that her mother always threatened to sell her. Those words hit Marcus like a rusty nail to the heart. He felt a sudden urge to find her deadbeat parents and give them what they deserved. Seeing his silence, the girl's composure finally broke. She sobbed out an apology, admitting she was simply terrified. Large tears began to fall onto her legs, which she couldn't even feel. Marcus was completely flustered by the sight. He begged her to stop crying so they could talk, but his words only seemed to open the floodgates. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button. The girl stopped crying instantly, though tears still fell as she pouted her lips. She looked more like a fierce little emoji than a victim, making Marcus look like the true villain. Finally, he reached his limit. He gave in, asking what she actually needed him to do. Her answer was simple. She just wanted to eat. That was it. Marcus had prepared himself for a monumental request, only for her to ask for a meal. He asked if that was really all she wanted. He told her that eating was no big deal, and she should have just said so. He asked if there were any carrots or eggs left. She mentioned there was rice in the cooker before lowering her head timidly. Marcus didn't think much of her guilty expression at the time. He headed straight for the kitchen, planning to whip up some simple egg fried rice. But once inside, he realized the situation was dire. Aside from the range hood, there were only a few eggs, some withered carrots, and 2 battered pots. It was a sad sight, really. The kitchen was heartbreakingly bare, but at least the basic seasonings were there. Making a simple golden fried rice should have been easy. However, when he confidently opened the rice cooker, he found a literal gray forest of mold growing inside. It was quite a sight. The rice at the bottom was so hard it could have been used as a weapon. Marcus took a deep breath and looked for the culprit. He spotted her trying to sneak back to her room in her wheelchair. He told her to stay right where she was. She froze instantly, wanting to flee but not daring to, looking at him with those pitiful eyes. It was enough to make him laugh in frustration. He demanded an explanation for the science project in the cooker. He asked her exactly how many days that rice had been sitting there. She sheepishly guessed 3 or 4 days. Marcus noted that it takes much longer than that to cultivate such a perfect fungal colony. She muttered that the rice cooker simply wasn't listening to her. Seeing her pout, Marcus could only sigh at his own bad luck. As he was scrubbing the pot, a terrifying thought suddenly struck him. He asked her exactly how long it had been since she last ate. 2 days, she whispered, as her stomach let out a perfectly timed growl. Finally, Marcus understood the reality of her desperation. Realizing she was literally starving, he hurried to scrub the dishes. Meanwhile, she waited obediently in the living room, peeking in occasionally. To be more precise, she was staring at the rice cooker with pure longing. About 20 minutes later, Marcus finally brought out the food. He brought out a pot of fragrant fried rice, only to realize there wasn't even a proper dining table in the room. However, the girl suddenly produced a folding table. As if by magic, she set up the table along with some heat-resistant mats. Marcus handed her a spoon, and she immediately took a massive, eager bite. She didn't even bother to blow on it, shoving the hot rice into her mouth and wincing at the heat. He told her to slow down, as no one was going to steal it. Marcus took a bite himself and found it decent enough. Hearing this, the girl fell silent for a moment before she began shoveling the rice in even faster. At first, he assumed the poor child was just starving. But halfway through the meal, tears suddenly began streaming down her face even as she continued to eat. He wondered why she was crying again, worrying for a moment that he hadn't scrubbed the pot well enough. To be honest, the thought absolutely terrified him. But the girl suddenly broke into a smile through her tears, wiping her eyes as she explained that she was simply thinking of her grandmother. She mentioned that her grandmother used to say the exact same things to her. Marcus started to respond, but he was momentarily dazed by her healing smile. In that moment, much of the gloom in his heart was swept away. He had to admit he felt a small spark of affection, but he quickly shook the thought away. He startled her by slapping his own face to snap out of it. After calming her down, he decided he'd leave once he taught her some basic survival skills. He asked her where she went to school, assuming that at her age, she should have at least finished vocational training. She seemed very sensitive to the topic. She looked down for a long time before whispering that she only made it through middle school. It turned out her classmates used to tease her constantly. She had been so sad that her grandmother stopped sending her, though she whispered that she actually could have endured it. Marcus let out a long sigh. Being stuck at home for so long had left her completely disconnected from society, and now even her grandmother, the only one who loved her, was gone. Her social skills were non-existent, and her mental age likely hadn't progressed since middle school. Realizing her education was a dead end, he asked about community subsidies. He asked if her family had ever received any government aid, but she simply shook her head in confusion. Her lack of basic knowledge was giving him a headache. Suddenly, she interrupted his thoughts, asking if she could draw a picture of him. She admitted she was afraid that if he left, he might never come back. Before he could even answer, she turned her wheelchair and hurried back to her room. Curious, Marcus followed her, but the moment he opened the door, he was absolutely stunned by what he saw. The girl's eyes sparkled with a sudden, clear confidence the moment she mentioned her love for drawing, though we can hardly imagine how difficult it must have been for her to paint on these walls. She simply pulled out her sketchbook with a joyful smile, her eyes darting back and forth between the page and Marcus. In less than half an hour, the portrait was finished. He reached out to take the book from her, slightly trembling hands, but the moment he saw the drawing, he froze. It depicted him crouching in the rainy night, holding a plate of fried rice, while a tiny white kitten tugged at his pant leg, looking up longingly at the food. Marcus hadn't expected that in the girl's heart. This was how she saw him. However, he wondered where this little cat had come from. The girl didn't answer his question directly. Instead, she quickly turned away, though he noticed her ears were turning a bright, smoky red. He realized then that the cat represented her. He instinctively looked at the top of her head, half expecting to see actual cat ears, only to meet a pair of confused and wary eyes. The girl shrank back into her wheelchair. To break the awkward silence, Marcus quickly changed the subject and asked to see her other drawings. She agreed, showing him a sketch of a woman named Mrs. Gable from downstairs, whom she often saw waving whenever she managed to sneak out. Then there was Mr. Miller, a local carpenter. It turned out he was the one who had repaired her old wheelchair for her. As Marcus flipped through the pages, he saw all the different people who had helped her or crossed her path captured in this little book. It wasn't just a sketchbook. It was a warm, beautifully illustrated diary of her life. Suddenly, Marcus had a brilliant idea. He pulled out his phone to check the market price for custom avatars, which went for about $5 or $10, enough for her to support herself. He found a cute, stylized profile picture online and asked the girl if she could draw something in that style. Fortunately, a basic drawing tablet only cost about $20, which was well within his budget. Besides, he had an old laptop gathering dust at home that they could use. He worried she might not have a phone, but she claimed she did. However, when she pulled an ancient, battered flip phone from her pocket, the hope Marcus had been holding on to finally withered away. He decided the phone issue would have to wait. After all, for a man who could barely afford his own meals, the startup costs for this project were becoming quite high, and there was no guarantee she would even get any commissions. To be honest, this moment, Marcus felt a wave of doubt and considered giving up, but seeing the lingering light in the girl's eyes, he decided to grit his teeth and face the challenges ahead. Life was already a mess, so he figured he might as well be a little impulsive for once. Suddenly, he remembered the apartment his parents had rented before they passed away. Although the lease would expire in 2 weeks, there was a $3,000 deposit he could likely get back. He also planned to ask the community center about disability subsidies. After that, he would find a new job. With his savings, he could probably support the girl for a month or two. The only thing left was to confirm her own wishes. He asked if she wanted to earn her own living through her art, and hearing her firm, positive response, Marcus felt a sudden sense of relief wash over him. He planned to head back and tidy up the old house first, but as he turned to leave, the girl once again reached out and tugged at his sleeve. She softly asked if he would return the next day. Seeing her so cautious and uncertain, Marcus didn't know whether to laugh or cry, though he was relieved. She wasn't asking him to stay the night. She introduced herself as Summer, and he told her his name was Marcus. On the following morning, he called the landlord to ask for the deposit. Perhaps moved by the story of his parents' passing, the landlord even refunded the remaining half-month as rent. Next, he headed to the commercial district and found a job at a silver shop for $3,000 a month. By the time he finished his errands, it was already noon. It was then he remembered he had a hungry little mushroom spirit waiting for him, so he rushed back to the girls' apartment in a panic. However, the moment he stepped out of the elevator, he smelled something burning. Realizing something was wrong, he sprinted to the door and pounded on it. Fortunately, the door opened after a moment, and a cloud of black smoke billowed out. There, he saw a certain wheelchair monster, coughing uncontrollably at the entrance, her eyes darting around like a child who had done something wrong. She sheepishly noted that he was finally back. Relieved that she was unhurt, Marcus rushed into the kitchen to turn off the smoking rice cooker. When he finally lifted the lid, he was left utterly speechless. The pot was bone dry, without a single drop of water, and the bottom had been burned into black charcoal. He turned around and caught the little mushroom spirit just as she was trying to sneak away. He demanded an explanation, and she admitted she had tried to cook, but she was afraid of doing a bad job and being seen, so she hesitated for so long that she simply forgot the pot was on. Marcus was fuming. If he hadn't arrived in time, there's no telling how much trouble she would have caused. He told Summer that if she tried to cook again, he might just have to stew her instead. But seeing Summer's pouting, aggrieved face, his anger vanished instantly. He told her to go wait while he prepared the meal. Marcus called out to Summer, who let out a soft sound of acknowledgement before turning her wheelchair and leaving the kitchen. After the meal was finished, Summer sat there patting her slightly bulging stomach. To be honest, she didn't actually eat much, perhaps 2 or 3 times less than an average person, but she seemed to get full quite easily. Seeing this, Marcus couldn't help but tease her, noting that her little belly was already perfectly round and asking if she wanted to go out for a walk to digest. Summer nodded obediently, but then quickly covered her stomach, insisting it wasn't round at all. He noticed that while she still spoke slowly, she wasn't nearly as timid as before. And so, Marcus told Summer to bring her documents, as they were heading to the Civil Affairs Bureau. But the moment she heard those words, Summer panicked instantly. The Civil Affairs Bureau? She stammered that they had only just met and that this might be moving a bit too fast. Marcus told her she was overthinking things. He only wanted her to bring her disability certificate and ID to ask about her subsidies, specifically where they were being sent or if she had ever received them. He stared at the girl in the wheelchair as she finally realized her mistake. The atmosphere became incredibly awkward, and Marcus found himself retreating outside to wait for her, though he wasn't quite sure what he was running from. He couldn't quite figure her out. If she was like a child, she certainly understood the implications of the Civil Affairs Bureau quickly enough. Yet, in terms of common sense, she clearly seemed to be missing a few gears. Perhaps she was just naturally airhead, or was she deeper than she looked? The thought made him shiver slightly. Just then, Summer poked her head out cautiously, and seeing that he was still there, she let out a visible sigh of relief. He urged her to hurry up, joking that if they were late and he got tired of waiting in line, he might just toss her out and sit in the wheelchair himself. Summer was clearly startled, accusing him of being a bully. Her small hands worked the wheels of the chair as she pushed herself out. Marcus couldn't help but laugh at the sight, but then they ran into Mrs. Gable. The elderly neighbor stopped him immediately, watching him with a wary gaze as if she feared the girl was being tricked by a villain. Marcus quickly explained, and upon learning that he was the one who had saved Summer the day before, Mrs. Gable's expression shifted to one of pleasant surprise. She looked him over, noting that while the young man seemed a bit poor, he looked honest enough. She sighed, lamenting that the poor girl's grandmother had passed away so suddenly, and her own old bones couldn't help much longer. With that, she gave a meaningful look to Summer, whose face was now flushed bright red. Seeing the situation, Marcus quickly changed the subject, asking Mrs. Gable if she knew where Summer's disability subsidies were being sent. However, the elderly woman admitted that she had no idea. She asked Summer if she remembered the password to her grandmother's bank book, but the girl simply shook her head. This was going to be a problem. And so, Marcus decided to take her to the bank to get her own debit card. That way, they could simply update the payment account and save themselves future trouble. He began pushing Summer toward the bank, and along the way, she kept turning her head to steal glances at him. Finally, after what seemed like a great internal struggle, she gathered the courage to ask if she was finally going to have her own bank book. He told her not to get her hopes up. There would be no bank book. Seeing her hesitate, Marcus couldn't resist teasing the poor girl a little longer. But then he added the good news. She would have her own bank card, which was much more convenient. Summer asked timidly if a bank card was expensive. He assured her it wasn't, noting that it only cost about $10 to issue one. To his surprise, she gasped. $10 seemed like a fortune to her, as she whispered that it was enough for a whole week of pocket money. Marcus was stunned by her sense of scale. He asked her when exactly she was receiving that kind of allowance, and she stammered that it was back in middle school. He took a deep breath, feeling a pang of pity for her. He told her not to worry, promising that he would find a way to help her earn hundreds of times that amount in the future. She looked up and asked if he was serious. Summer tilted her head, looking a bit confused. Clearly, she had no real concept of such large numbers. Her clear eyes held nothing but pure hope for the promise itself. However, the moment they entered the crowded bank, her social anxiety flared up again. When the clerk asked what business she needed to attend to, she began to stutter, frantically clutching Marcus's sleeve as if searching for a literal lifeline. To help her out, Marcus gestured for her to pass her documents through the small window to the clerk. Instead, Summer panicked and tried to shove her entire bag through the slot like a coin into a machine. The staff were momentarily stunned, but fortunately, the process ended smoothly and she received her card. Marcus even made sure to set up online banking for her. This meant she wouldn't have to come downstairs every time she needed to check her balance. On the way to the Civil Affairs Bureau, Summer gripped that card tightly in her hands, staring at it and letting out a few silly giggles. We see Marcus watching this, unable to stop himself from joking that it was just a piece of plastic. He teased her for being so happy over a card, warning her that someone might mistake her for a foolish child and kidnap her. Summer immediately protested. She insisted she wasn't foolish and told him that he was the only one who called her that, which made him the real bad guy in this scenario. Marcus realized if he let her keep talking, he might actually get arrested for bullying. But just as he reached out to pat her head, something felt strange. The moment he touched her, she went completely silent. Marcus realized his behavior might be inappropriate and quickly pulled his hand back to apologize, but Summer surprisingly blamed herself instead, stammering that it was fine and she had simply been too excited. At that moment, Marcus felt like scolding his own impulsive hand. Summer had just been so adorable that he hadn't been able to resist patting her head. He offered a clumsy explanation, hoping that would be the end of it. He thought he had successfully distracted her, but after thinking for a few seconds, Summer suddenly blurted out a question. Why exactly did he want to pat her head? Marcus was caught off guard by her directness. Seeing her looking at him with such earnest, honest eyes, he decided the only way out was the truth. He admitted that he thought she was as cute as a little animal and just couldn't help himself. He looked away, pretending to be indifferent while stealing a glance. At her reaction, Summer simply let out a soft sound and turned her head away, though it looked very much like she was secretly smiling to herself. Marcus didn't overthink it, assuming she was just happy to be called cute. Not long after, they finally arrived at the Civil Affairs Bureau. We see that the queue was already quite long. Summer looked at the beaming couples surrounding them and asked curiously if all these people were there to get married. Marcus gave a brief confirmation, afraid that saying too much might overwhelm the poor girl with unnecessary information. But then, Summer pointed toward a man and woman nearby who looked incredibly gloomy. She asked if they were also there to get married. Marcus noted they were likely there for a divorce, or perhaps other business. He jokingly suggested they go ask, but the mere thought of talking to strangers made Summer shrink back in fear. She stammered that since he knew so much, he must have been married many times before. He quickly corrected her. He had never been married, and this was his first time at the bureau as well. Summer then asked if she would get married one day. He told her it was her choice to make. She paused, then asked if she was even allowed to choose someone else. A flicker of hope appeared in her eyes, only to fade just as quickly. She whispered, wondering if anyone would ever choose her. Hearing such self-deprecating words, Marcus felt a sudden surge of protective anger. He asked her who had told her such things, and she admitted it was her mother. Her mother had told her that for someone like her, being able to marry anyone at all was a blessing. Summer whispered that she thought her mother was right, and that she would be satisfied if anyone was simply willing to pick her. Her voice grew smaller as she gripped the frame of her wheelchair for support. Marcus immediately leaned down to comfort her, telling her not to think such things. He assured her she was wonderful, so wonderful that others should feel lucky to know her. Marcus asked if she truly believed that, joking that he was now too ashamed to even look her in the eye. Perhaps it was because he felt guilty, but he instinctively looked away from Summer. After a moment of thought, she suddenly asked if it was because he simply didn't like looking at her. To say he didn't like it would be a lie, but saying he did might lead things in a strange direction. He was completely at a loss for words. Fortunately, Summer didn't dwell on it, though she wasn't quite finished with her questions. She asked if she would end up divorced like those people, noting how sad they all seemed. It reminded her of how her parents used to be, constantly unhappy and always fighting with one another. Marcus didn't know how to answer. To be honest, having just gone through a breakup himself, he felt hardly qualified to give advice. Thinking of his own messy life, he felt a wave of self-deprecating disappointment. But a moment later, he felt a small hand gently touch him. Summer told him not to be sad, noting that his hands were very large enough to cradle her head. They reminded her of her grandfather's hands, and since he was a good man, she decided Marcus must be one too. Marcus couldn't help but laugh. He wondered how her strange logic connected being a good person to having large hands, but he had to admit that since meeting Summer, his mood had improved significantly. Soon, it was finally their turn at the counter. This time, Marcus didn't wait for Summer to struggle. He spoke up first, asking the clerk about her subsidies and how to change the bank account for the payments. The clerk asked for their documents, and Marcus gave a small nudge to the dazed Summer. She quickly pulled a stack of papers from her bag. Having done this once already, her movements were much more natural this time. However, when the staff member asked why they were changing the account, Summer froze up again. She glanced at Marcus instinctively, not wanting to cause him trouble, but she struggled to find the words. It was clear she hadn't yet overcome her inner fear, so Marcus quickly stepped in to explain that her grandmother had recently passed away. The clerk then asked for proof and a completed form. He assured them it was no problem and that a signature would suffice. Summer felt a sense of relief and picked up the pen to begin filling out the paperwork. But her newfound calm was short-lived, as the clerk suddenly asked if the two of them were a couple. The clerk suggested they get their marriage certificate right then, mentioning they'd even get free groceries and a basin. Marcus suddenly realized he had almost forgotten they were at the Civil Affairs Bureau. He quickly explained they were just friends, glancing at Summer, only to find her face was already beet red. If he hadn't stopped her in time, her pen would have wandered right off the edge of the paperwork. Before they left, we see him checking with the staff. He learned the subsidy would be issued in 2 days, which allowed him to finally breathe a sigh of relief. It was only about $200, but combined with his own new salary, it meant Summer wouldn't go hungry this month. To be honest, that was enough. As they left the building, he noticed she was still dwelling on the clerk's suggestion, as if she had a deep, misunderstood need for marriage. It turned out her grandmother had once told her that a husband was meant to be a true partner, someone who would blow on her wounds when she fell and accept all her flaws. Her eyes were filled with a quiet, hopeful longing. We realized that for Summer, marriage wasn't about romance, but simply a search for companionship. Marcus asked if she had a specific type in mind. After all, one can't simply spend a lifetime with someone they dislike. Summer admitted she hadn't thought about it, but her grandmother had once told her that if she found someone she liked, she should just lure them home and conquer them with her cooking. One has to admit, that is a rather bold family philosophy. But knowing her disastrous skills in the kitchen, Marcus couldn't help but feel a wave of pity for whatever unlucky soul might end up at her dinner table. Summer, noticing his skeptical expression, lost a bit of her confidence. Yet she stubbornly insisted that she would eventually learn to make everything taste delicious. She joked that if all else failed, she would just force her captive to cook for her instead. Marcus felt a sudden, cold shiver. He couldn't help but recall their first meeting. It sounded suspiciously like she was describing his current situation, which, naturally, was a bit concerning. However, looking at her innocent, slightly dazed face, he doubted she was capable of such a scheme. He tentatively asked how that was. Any different from press-ganging someone into forced labor? The absurdity of the comparison made him pause, but Summer seemed to take the question quite seriously. She quietly admitted that she hadn't actually looked at it from that perspective before. It was very likely that someone would take advantage of her, but she simply wanted someone to stay by her side. Summer looked completely defeated. She was the spitting image of how he used to be, but seeing her like this only made the fire of Marcus's anger burn even brighter. He asked who told her she had to act this way just for companionship, and if she'd considered what a stranger might do. She stammered that he hadn't done anything, but he snapped back that it was only because he felt like a failure himself. Did she really think people cherish things given for free? Most would just take her for a fool. She apologized, calling him a good person. As Summer's tears began to fall, she managed to hand him a good person card mid-lecture, which honestly made him laugh in frustration. He decided to be blunt and asked if she truly intended to trap him as her husband. She admitted that at first, she just wanted company, but after realizing he was kind and seeing the Civil Affairs Bureau, she thought it was a real possibility. She apologized for being too impatient, and after that, Summer fell completely silent. Fortunately, Marcus finally realized the problem. While she seemed to understand the world, her priorities were entirely backward. Her desire for marriage wasn't born of love or passion, but a desperate need for a companion, which, as we know, is a dangerous foundation. Though he felt a flicker of attraction, he couldn't bring himself to take advantage of a girl standing on the edge of a cliff. So, he lifted Summer's chin, forcing her to look him in the eye, and asked her directly if she even liked him. She admitted she didn't know. He pointed out how absurd it was to want marriage when she couldn't even define her own feelings. Seeing her lip tremble as if she were about to burst into tears, Marcus rubbed his head, realizing he had been a bit too harsh. He reminded her that he promised not to run away, so why couldn't she take the time to see if he was actually a good match? He urged her to figure out what she truly needed before making such life-altering decisions. It was as if he had opened a new door for her. He gently ruffled her hair, noting that her injury wasn't a death sentence. He told her she had plenty of time, but Summer didn't respond. Instead, her face grew deeper and deeper red. Something was wrong. She was burning up. Realizing he was far too close, Marcus quickly stepped back, apologizing for his boldness, but Summer only hesitated for a moment before whispering words that made his heart skip a beat. She asked if he would choose her once she figured things out. After speaking, Summer looked down at her legs with trepidation, her deep-seated insecurity practically overflowing. It was heartbreaking to see, but in the next second, Marcus suddenly pushed her wheelchair forward, picking up the pace as he told her they were going grocery shopping. He joked that since he'd already kidnapped her for the day, he might as well put her to work. Summer let out a startled gasp. She seemed to want to look back to see if he was truly angry, but after hesitating, she simply let out a silly little giggle. She softly repeated his words about being kidnapped. To be honest, when this girl acts a bit foolish, she's actually quite adorable. Marcus couldn't resist reaching out to pat her head again. This time, he didn't even bother making up an excuse for it. He simply acted as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening at all. Summer tilted her chin up slightly, her voice sounding a bit more confident as she asked if he found her cute. Marcus realized she was becoming much harder to tease. When he didn't answer, she grew bold enough to call out to him. She told him she thought he was cute too, and then, with eyes full of expectation, she asked if she could pat his head. He was stunned by her directness. He wondered how on earth she concluded he was cute. Apparently, it was because of how he looked when angry. He jokingly asked if she had some sort of masochistic streak and needed a hospital visit, but she quickly cut him off. She insisted she didn't, explaining that she knew he only got angry because he cared, which made him seem cute despite her fear. He teased her again about her strange preferences, and Summer, feeling bullied and flustered, declared she wouldn't say another word. Her ability to speak clearly started to fail her again as she grew anxious, leaving her to just pout in silence. However, Marcus's attention had shifted to a nearby phone store. He told her to wait there and, after a moment's hesitation, headed inside. A few minutes later, he hurried back out and tossed a small white box into Summer's lap. She looked up, completely stunned. She stared at the box for a long time, unable to process that he had actually bought something for her. He told her it was an apology for being harsh earlier, feeling a bit like a nervous teenager giving a girl a gift for the first time. Summer protested that it was far too expensive, but Marcus insisted it was just a budget model, claiming he couldn't afford anything better anyway. We can see she clearly loved the little box, yet she still tried her best to hand the phone back to him. Marcus took a step back to stay out of her reach, but to his surprise, Summer actually began pushing her wheelchair toward him. Terrified she might fall, he quickly came up with a new excuse, reminding her that she was now his official cook. He argued she needed a phone so he could call her whenever he was hungry. Summer looked at him, wondering if that actually made sense. He pushed further, pointing out she'd need it to earn money later, and she could simply pay him back then. A logical trap, really. After a bit more back and forth, Summer finally accepted the gift, though she solemnly vowed to pay him back every cent one day. Noticing the time, Marcus started pushing the wheelchair toward the grocery store. The mere mention of food immediately brightened Summer's mood. But a second later, a sudden wave of anxiety hit her. She asked if he had bought the phone just so he could leave her. He promised he wouldn't, but when she asked how long he'd stay, he simply told her to wait until after dinner for an answer. Night fell quickly, casting a peaceful glow through the attic window as they finished their meal. Summer leaned back, looking quite content. She let out a long stretch, her thin t-shirt riding up slightly to reveal her small, full stomach after the hearty dinner. The movement highlighted just how slender and fragile her frame truly was. It was a quiet, vulnerable moment. It seemed she was becoming much more comfortable around him. Noticing his gaze, however, Summer quickly covered herself up. She defensively asked what he was looking at. Marcus just teased her, asking what there was to see when she was so skinny. Summer pouted, insisting that being thin was beautiful. It seems even she has a bit of a vain side, doesn't she? Marcus laughed, joking that she'd need to cling to a lamppost during a storm just to stay grounded, and told her to eat more. She rubbed her stomach, admitting she couldn't eat another bite. Her smile radiated a simple, pure kind of happiness. To her, a full stomach seemed to be the greatest joy in the world. Marcus asked one last time if she was full, and she nodded happily. Her eyes suddenly lit up, sensing an opening to ask her question, but Marcus quickly cut her off before she could speak. He announced he was leaving and would return tomorrow to feed her, ignoring her protests that he was playing foul. Deep down, he was simply trying to escape the question he had dodged earlier, the question of whether he would choose her. Looking at his own messy life, he felt he could barely take care of himself, let alone offer her a decent future. Like many who grow up with nothing, a sense of inferiority was etched into his bones. He felt no better than this poor girl. Yet, in that moment, a fierce desire took hold of him, a desperate hunger for money and the confidence to stand tall. He craved the capital to live life on his own terms, though for now, that was nothing more than a distant dream. Summer noticed the dimming light in his eyes and hesitated, only speaking up just as he turned to leave. She asked if he could stay, and Marcus paused, losing track of how many times she had tried to keep him there. He turned his head and asked with a light, airy tone what her excuse was this time for wanting him to stay. Summer looked at him, then quickly looked away, softly suggesting that he actually had nowhere else to live. Marcus fell silent for a long time before letting out a sigh of defeat, asking her how on earth she knew that. She whispered that he smelled, making him realize he hadn't showered or changed since getting caught in yesterday's rain. He tried one last desperate defense, suggesting he was just a messy person, but she pointed out how clean he'd made the kitchen. Admitting defeat, he raised his hands in surrender, but then asked where he would even sleep in such a small space. He pointed out the awkwardness of sharing the room, and asked if she wasn't afraid he might have certain intentions toward her. His voice softened as he told her he knew she was just acting out of sympathy, and Summer nodded honestly in agreement. Then, she turned the tables, asking if he was admitting that he actually did have feelings for her. Marcus nearly choked, taking a step back in shock at how quickly this girl's social intuition was evolving. He rubbed his temples, unable to answer while she stared at him with such clear, innocent eyes and asked such a direct question. Marcus explained that staying would only give him a sense of guilt, admitting that while Summer was beautiful and pure, he had to be honest with himself. He confessed she was occasionally annoying, but perfectly lovely, the kind of woman any normal man would naturally have thoughts about. We see him take 2 steps forward and kneel, looking her in the eye as he explains that because she is so special, he must exercise restraint. Summer nodded obediently, then asked a question that caught him off guard. If she had those feelings for him first, would his guilt simply vanish? Marcus felt his mind go numb, but before he could process the thought, he felt a cool, soft sensation brush against his cheek. By the time he snapped back to reality, her delicate face had already retreated, turning a deep shade of crimson right before our eyes. Despite her embarrassment, she remained stubborn, staring at him as if her entire world depended on getting a real answer from him. He instinctively touched his cheek and stood up, his voice rising in a mix of shock and confusion as he asked her if she even knew what she was doing. He couldn't even begin to untangle his messy emotions, while Summer stammered that she knew she was clumsy and confused about most things. She admitted she didn't quite understand how loving someone was supposed to work, yet her voice carried a weight of absolute sincerity. She told him she was certain she would love him in the future, so she was simply borrowing that love from her future self right now. It was a strange sort of emotional loan, she explained, which in her mind made a small kiss perfectly acceptable. Having exhausted her courage, she immediately buried her head in her hands, leaving Marcus standing there in stunned, absolute silence. His brain was practically smoking, and after a long pause, he could only manage to ask if life actually worked that way. Summer nodded with total conviction, arguing that if she could borrow his phone and pay him back later, she could surely borrow feelings from herself. Marcus felt as though his own logic had just hit him in the back of the head. To be honest, he had taught her a bit too well. He tried to argue that emotions weren't like a mortgage, wondering who on earth tries to take out a loan on their future heart. Summer whispered that a loan from yourself never has to be paid back, showing a flash of wit that Marcus told her not to use against him. When she innocently asked if she should use that wit on others instead, Marcus blurted out a firm no before he could even think to stop himself. He immediately regretted his reflex, but Summer just laughed, clearly having baited him, and suddenly, she didn't seem to mind his smell at all. Marcus tried to maintain a stern expression, demanding to know who taught her such logic, though deep down, he suspected it was Grandma Rose. Summer just shrugged, muttering that since the nails were already driven in, they might as well be used to hang things. Then, she suddenly gave him a push. The girl had somehow slipped behind him and was now shoving him with all her might, insisting he go wash up because he smelled quite terrible. Although she was clearly putting in a lot of effort, she wasn't very strong, and Marcus only moved a few symbolic steps before stopping to ask if she was truly sure about him staying. He wanted to be certain she had thought this through, but she simply repeated that since she had already borrowed affection from her future self, it was settled. She explained that since she was the one with feelings for him first, he shouldn't feel any burden. Marcus, however, felt a massive headache coming on. In his frustration, he started speaking without thinking, arguing that the future is unpredictable and she couldn't possibly know if those borrowed feelings would be love or hate. He even suggested they might become total strangers in a few months, and seeing Summer's head drop, he realized he had struck her at her most vulnerable point. Just as he was about to apologize and take it back, Summer looked up and asked a question that nearly floored him. How could she prove her feelings were real? She then asked if she could try borrowing another kiss, which made Marcus throw his hands up in a panic, surrendering before things went any further. He quickly told her he believed her just to stop the conversation, and Summer nodded with a tiny, proud smile that showed she had won this round. She seemed to listen to his concerns, though how much she actually took to heart remained a mystery, as she then asked him to stay until he found a permanent home. She looked at him with those pleading eyes, and Marcus, feeling his resolve crumbling, asked her to give him just one good reason to stay. He took a deep breath, realizing he was looking for a reason to convince himself as much as her. Summer sat in silence for a long, long time. Finally, she whispered with absolute certainty that she simply didn't want anyone else to take him away from her, a reason that left Marcus completely speechless. He asked if she was telling the truth, and when she opened her eyes wide and nodded, he couldn't bring himself to look at her, grabbing his bag and rushing toward the bathroom. The bathroom door slammed shut, followed by the sound of rushing water and a sudden, muffled shout from Marcus as he realized the water was ice cold. 10 minutes later, he emerged in clean clothes to find that the wheelchair tracks on the floor had been meticulously wiped away. Summer had moved from her chair and was sitting on the floor waiting for him. He dried his hair with a towel, asking why she had climbed down. As Marcus walked over, she looked up with a bright smile and explained that being on the floor allowed her to be just a little bit closer to him. His heart skipped a beat. This girl's directness was becoming hard to handle, so Marcus suppressed his racing pulse and sat down beside her. We see the phone box sitting on the small table, still sealed in plastic. He asked if she'd just been waiting, and Summer simply nodded. Summer didn't see the problem, but Marcus couldn't help but imagine how lonely her daily life must be as he glanced at her. It was only then that he realized just how small and fragile the girl in the wheelchair really was. He asked why she didn't find some entertainment. She looked up at him and admitted her mind was too full of thoughts of him sitting beside her to ever feel bored. Her large eyes were shimmering with a light that expressed more than words ever could. Marcus insisted that didn't matter and urged her to play with the phone, practically shoving the box into her arms to change the subject. Summer studied the box from every angle, trying to pick at the seal with her fingernails before eventually trying to use her teeth. Marcus rubbed his forehead, suggesting she use a key instead. Summer obediently took one out and began to poke at the packaging. With a soft snap, the box finally gave way, revealing the sleek device hidden inside as she continued to work at the seal. A polished black screen lay quietly within the box, and she lifted it out with such care, her eyes growing brighter by the second. Seeing her expression, Marcus couldn't help but smile as he asked if she liked it. Summer looked up at him, swaying slightly. She stared at him with those blinking, wide eyes, and Marcus quickly looked away, telling her to hurry up and turn it on. His heart was racing again. This girl had a habit of treating her most powerful emotional strikes like casual conversation. Being stared at so intensely was overwhelming, but luckily, the smartphone setup tutorial was simple enough for Summer to follow. She looked at him happily, her face practically begging for a compliment as she announced she had already learned the basics. Marcus didn't hold back his praise, telling her she was quite clever while reaching out to gently pat her head. Summer fell silent, appearing both accustomed to the affection and perhaps a little startled by how natural it felt to her. She remained frozen in that position until Marcus awkwardly withdrew his hand, and only then did she ask where his contact info was. To be honest, he still wasn't used to her bluntness, especially how she could ask such heavy questions with such an innocent face. Faced with such a direct question, Marcus felt his defensive instincts kick in again, and he began rambling about how her cuteness was the kind that might blow up a rice cooker. Summer pondered this for a moment before seemingly comforting herself with the thought. She told him that if he found her cute, he should stop smirking. She urged him to add her as a friend so she could finally sleep. Marcus quickly pulled out his phone, asking if she used the standard messaging apps. Summer was easily led into the new topic, surprised that he even knew about those apps. To be honest, she seemed genuinely impressed by his basic knowledge. Marcus suddenly froze, realizing it would be stranger if he didn't know them, but he wondered how she had learned about such things in her condition. She explained that her classmates used to talk about them during breaks. She then pulled out an old, outdated device to show him her own account. We see him glance at the ancient screen, noticing the interface belonged to a service that had long since shut down before his eyes landed on her ID. Her username was Summer Can't Cook, but she quickly insisted she had learned how. Her face flushed bright red as she snatched the phone back. She shielded the device protectively while Marcus suppressed a laugh, teasing her that not being able to cook rice wasn't the end of the world. Summer excitedly argued that she could at least fry an egg, but as she shifted her weight to emphasize the point, she lost her balance and tumbled into his arms. Marcus teased her for showing off and falling, but his voice trailed off as his hands hovered in midair, completely unsure of where to put them. It was a truly awkward situation, made worse by the fact that after falling, the girl remained perfectly still with her face buried against his lap. They sat in silence until his legs began to go numb. Finally, he couldn't help but ask how long she intended to stay lying there. She murmured that she just wanted to sleep, so Marcus, his throat feeling dry and his voice strained, told her she needed to go back to her own room. Summer whispered a request for him to carry her back, but Marcus tried to sound stern, telling her to get up and move on her own. He couldn't tell if he was imagining it, but it felt like she was acting spoiled when she threatened to just sleep right there on the floor. He realized he couldn't win this battle. If they stayed like this much longer, his legs would be completely useless by morning. With a frustrated sigh, he muttered that she had won again. He knew there was no point in arguing with her when she was like this. Summer caught the look of defeat on his face and, seeing her opening, quietly reached out her arms in a clear gesture for a hug. Marcus felt a headache coming on, but he carefully scooped her up into a princess carry, adjusting his grip to make sure she was comfortable. This little girl was playing dead and felt far too light. As her arms instinctively wrapped around his neck, Marcus felt a wave of helpless frustration wash over him. He muttered that she was using all her clever tricks just to handle him, while Summer simply curled up tighter against him, ignoring his complaints. She buried her face in his chest and whispered that since he'd held her, he couldn't leave, or she would cry, a thought that made his heart skip a beat. He let out a long sigh, reassuring her once more that he wasn't going anywhere. He turned off the light and stepped out, hearing a faint murmur from inside. Summer whispered a soft goodnight, her voice so sweet we can almost picture her silly smile. Marcus replied to the empty air with a quiet goodnight of his own. He slumped down next to his wheelchair, realizing they still hadn't added each other as friends. He spent ages fiddling with his phone before making a grim discovery. The $10 he'd just topped up had been eaten by old fees, leaving him with pennies and no data plan. He decided he'd have to install broadband soon. We see him staring at the ceiling, making mental calculations before spreading out his bedding. However, sleep refused to come as he tossed and turned. Only now, lying here, did he truly feel how incredibly difficult this girl's life had become. He had realized earlier there wasn't even a water heater for a shower. He wondered how she would survive the winter, and air conditioning was out of the question. The only appliance was an old electric fan gathering dust in the corner. His mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, and after tossing for hours, he finally went outside to smoke several cigarettes just to calm his nerves. He managed to fall into a fitful sleep, but by dawn, he felt a strange, urgent pressure, as if he were being chased by a deadline he couldn't see. He woke up with a start, his heart pounding, only to find it was barely 6 in the morning. He looked around, reorienting himself to this unfamiliar home. In the morning quiet, he cooked some rice and a few dishes, then washed up and prepared to head out for the day. But as he gripped the doorknob, a sudden sense of emptiness hit him. He instinctively looked back at her bedroom door, and that hollow feeling began to fade. Realizing he'd forgotten something important, he quickly pulled out a notepad to write a message, explaining that he hadn't run away, but had simply gone to work. He noted that the food was in the pot and ready for 2 meals. Then, he crept to her door to stick the note there, though he still felt it wasn't enough. He wrote a few more notes and placed them in the most obvious spots before finally feeling safe enough to leave. His first task was calling a broadband technician. He scheduled an appointment for the afternoon and then headed straight for that rather shady-looking storefront. At exactly 8 o'clock, he stood waiting outside. He stared at the tightly shut rolling shutter in deep thought, wondering if the place had gone bust, until an hour later when he finally heard a familiar voice. We see a young man named Leo approaching from a distance, carrying breakfast and looking full of energy as he spots Marcus waiting. He shouts out, asking if Marcus is trying to reach enlightenment this early. Marcus asks when the shop actually opens, only to hear it's 10 o'clock. Leo claims opening an hour early is quite diligent, leaving Marcus feeling a bit stifled. Leo then offers to share his breakfast as he walks over. Noticing the pile of cigarette butts on the ground, Leo asks if Marcus is trying to get lung cancer. Marcus silently crushes his last smoke under his shoe. After they finish eating, this eccentric boss actually drags Marcus into playing video games. It's been 2 days, and we see he hasn't done any real work yet. To be honest, Marcus is starting to feel a bit guilty about getting paid for doing absolutely nothing. Finally, he can't help but ask about the real work, but Leo just looks at him, wondering why on earth he's feeling so anxious. Marcus struggles to explain, finally admitting he's worried that if he doesn't create any value as an employee, he'll be fired. Leo just waves him off, launching into a long lecture about the attention economy and emotional value, concepts that seem to fly right over Marcus's head. Then, Leo simply scans a code and transfers $3,000 to him, assuming Marcus was just worried about when his paycheck would arrive. As Leo tosses his phone aside, Marcus stands there in shock for a long time, finally asking why it had to be him specifically. Leo's eyes sparkle as he explains that Marcus is cheap, useful, and just a little bit gullible. He adds that he finds Marcus's development quite interesting. Over the following days, Leo takes him to buy new clothes and get a haircut, determined to transform him from a scruffy outcast into someone respectable. While walking through a shopping district, Marcus unexpectedly runs into his ex-girlfriend, Sarah. Seeing him alone, she arrogantly assumes he's been stalking her. Just as the silence becomes unbearable, Leo reappears with ice cream and immediately goes on the offensive with a perfectly timed, sarcastic remark. He asks why an ex is acting like she's still the main character, then aggressively shoves an ice cream into Marcus's mouth with a provocative wink. Leo calls Marcus his brooding little pet, leaving Sarah so speechless and frustrated that she has no choice but to storm off in a rage. Marcus offers a quiet thanks for saving him from the awkwardness, but Leo just waves it off, telling him his taste in women was honestly terrible. Marcus clutches his head as a headache begins to set in. Leo notices his distress and finally agrees to drop the subject for now. By the time they return to the shop, it's already noon. Leo tells him that once the printer arrives, he'll have to work hard, a prospect Marcus actually welcomes. The mention of work instantly revives Marcus's spirits, but soon he drifts into deep thought, wondering if the girl back home has eaten properly. He worries if she's bored, if she's wandered out alone, or if she'll think he's abandoned her if he returns late. His mind is a mess of anxiety. In that moment, he quietly realizes that time seems to pass quite quickly whenever he's with her, though he isn't sure why. This realization makes him want to escape for some reason, so after work, he doesn't go straight home but heads to his old rental instead. He packs up his clothes, toiletries, and old computer, then drags his suitcase back to the apartment complex where he spots Mrs. Gable waving from afar. She calls out to him, and Marcus forces a polite response, though to be honest, this particular old lady always makes him feel a bit uneasy. As he reaches the building, he suddenly freezes. A very familiar head is peeking out from the hallway entrance in a rather suspicious manner. Seeing him, she ducks back like a child playing hide-and-seek, so Marcus pretends not to notice and walks casually toward the elevator. As he rounds the corner, a small hand reaches out quietly to grab the back of his. He feigns surprise and asks why she's come downstairs. She stammers that Mrs. Gable told her something, her face and ears gradually turning a deep shade of red as she struggles to speak. She explains that a man is happy to see his wife waiting when he gets off work, so she was just practicing in advance. Marcus feels his vision go dark. The electronic princess has struck again. Seeing his silence, Luna peeks at him cautiously and asks if he's unhappy. He looks at her and admits he is happy, finding that he suddenly can't look away. She then asks if this means she is his wife now. Marcus smacks his forehead, realizing this girl has somehow equated happiness with being a wife. He asks who on earth taught her that logic. He scolds her for coming down alone, worried she might fall, and playfully pinches her cheeks, but her next words leave him completely speechless. She asks if he's worried about her, and for once, Marcus is remarkably honest, admitting that yes, of course he is worried. He explains that the stairs are dangerous, and if anything happened to her, he would be devastated. Luna immediately hangs her head in apology. He tells her there's no need to apologize and promises to install a monitor soon, asking her to just be patient until then. Luna nods vigorously, whispering that she simply missed him. Marcus instinctively covers his eyes, feeling like she's being a bit too charming for his own good. She claims not to understand love, yet she constantly hits him with these direct, heart-tugging remarks, and truth be told, he missed her too. Marcus tries to keep his tone as light as possible, but even he feels a bit dazed after speaking. Luna's eyes sparkle as they head back home. He asks if she ate properly, his courage already spent as he retreats into small talk. Luna simply nods and pats her stomach. She shows him her slightly bulging belly with a satisfied look. As they step into the elevator, Marcus's mind is clearly elsewhere. He mentions that the internet technician will be coming soon, but before he can finish, Luna's voice echoes in the small space. She asks if they are considered a couple now. Marcus feels a pulse in his temple. The impulsive answer in his throat settles into a quiet, I don't know. She then wonders what couples actually do. He explains they mostly eat together, spend time together, and do things like hugging and kissing. He nearly slaps himself for saying it, realizing they've already checked most of those boxes. Seeing Luna getting ideas, he quickly adds that the most important part is mutual love. Luna's expression immediately sags. She asks when he will finally love her. Marcus sighs, wishing she'd ask a question he could actually answer. He tells her she doesn't even understand the concept herself. As they leave the elevator, she insists with certainty that she can learn. He jokes that she talks about love like it's a bank loan. He tells her to stay inside while he goes to buy groceries. After closing the door, he lights a cigarette with trembling hands, wondering where exactly things started to go sideways. Deep down, he asks himself if he's actually falling for her. But then the old doubt returns. Is he even worthy of her? Strangely, the $3,000 he just earned gives him a sudden, inexplicable sense of confidence. It's a modest start, but it's something. He reminds himself that he used to date just fine on a similar salary. He decides to stop overthinking before he loses his mind. His frustration turns into a sudden burst of resolve. They've already shared a home and a kiss. He can't exactly let her slip away now. If he's fallen for her, he might as well admit it. Instead of agonizing over what-ifs, he decides to focus on building a life together. The situation has spiraled far beyond his control anyway. Besides, if a girl like her can be this brave, he'd be a coward to keep running. On his way to the market, Marcus calls the technician to finalize the internet installation. To be honest, he's trying to stay busy. Once the technician arrives, Luna's social anxiety kicks in, and she hides in her room until the man finally leaves. We see her peek cautiously through the door, and Marcus can't help but wonder why she wasn't this shy when she first kidnapped him. He tells her she looks beautiful, exactly the way he likes, and that she looks even better today, which makes her blush slightly. Luna starts babbling nonsense in her flustered state, insisting that regardless of how it happened, she caught him, and that's that. He teases her for being a rogue as he connects her to the Wi-Fi and downloads a messaging app, which immediately explodes with notifications. A flood of messages from an old friend pours in, some dating back years, with the most recent one sent just 2 weeks ago. The last message is a digital memorial. Luna scrolls through them, her fingers trembling over the keyboard as she stares at the screen. Marcus asks softly if this was a good friend, and she nods, explaining they were classmates she never got to say goodbye to. He falls into a thoughtful silence, which immediately makes Luna panic, fearing that her past might somehow drive him away. She frantically clarifies that the friend is a girl and begs him not to leave her, though her intense nervousness seems a bit much. He glances at the friend's rather loud and colorful profile picture while Luna spends ages typing, only to send a single, solitary character. The friend on the other end practically explodes, shouting that after 6 years of silence, she only gets a one-word reply. Luna types another short MHM, which only serves to make her friend even more furious at the lack of a real explanation. After thinking very seriously, Luna slowly pokes out a message. I picked up a man, and he bought me a phone. Marcus quietly lowers his hand, realizing that between the two of them, they couldn't piece together one normal person if they tried. As the days pass, we see them growing closer. She mumbles sweet, almost sugary things before falling asleep in his arms. She secretly doodles in his embrace, drawing the two of them as a cat owner and a little white kitten, which is quite charming. Even when he's angry, she curls into a ball of nerves, but remains stubbornly unwilling to back down on things that matter. They had their share of arguments, of course, the worst being when she told him he could leave so she wouldn't hold. That particular fight was painful for both of them, leaving a heavy silence in the apartment for quite some time. But as a neighbor later remarked, if two people don't argue, they can never truly learn how to fit their lives together. Later on, Marcus took her to the hospital for a checkup, where the doctor explained her leg condition was a lingering effect of polio. With early treatment, she would have been fine, but a full course of stem cell therapy now would cost nearly $30,000. Luna immediately refused, saying having him was enough, but Marcus simply told her they would save up for it slowly. To help with their finances, he bought Luna a drawing tablet and a phone, helping her set up an account for art commissions. It was a small start, but for Luna, it represented something far more significant. This was the first time in her life she had earned her own money, and when that first payment arrived, she was beaming. She looked as happy as if she'd won the lottery, holding the phone up to show him the $6 she had earned. The notification was bright and clear. Marcus ruffled her hair and told her she did a wonderful job. Luna giggled and asked if he could use a different title to praise her, but Marcus playfully pretended not to understand. She insisted she wanted to hear him call her his wife, since they had already made things official in their own way. Though his ears turned red, he finally gave in and called her his wonderful wife, causing her eyes to go wide with joy. She threw herself into his arms, whispering sweetly that it was all thanks to him for finding her a way to succeed. Marcus wasn't sitting idle either. After receiving a base figure from a friend, he realized he could create custom models. He planned to turn these into social media content, so he visited an old college friend named Leo at his hardware store. He bought all the putty, spray paint, and pigments he needed, then brought an old computer home to start their new project. To his surprise, Luna showed an incredible talent for model making, solving several technical problems in under half an hour. She even used watercolor pens to add delicate details, looking up at him nervously to see if her work was acceptable. It far exceeded his expectations, so he pulled her into a warm embrace as she continued to sketch their daily lives. She drew a little white kitten clinging to a tall man who pretended to be annoyed but was secretly smiling. She named her account Summer Rain in the Attic, beautifully weaving both of their names into a single, shared identity. On the wall of his room, amidst a fading mural of the night sky, she had painted a fish swimming freely through a river of stars and a crab trapped on the ground. The crab was desperately trying to leap into that celestial river. Marcus realized she had painted herself as that crab, longing for freedom but stuck in place. The moment he truly understood the meaning behind the art, his throat felt dry with a sharp, aching sympathy. He asked her what she saw there. Her voice was calmer than he had ever heard it as she described the fish, the crab, the starry river, and those few but incredibly bright stars. He smiled then, a look like withered wood blooming in spring or a frozen river finally thawing, and she whispered that she had truly fallen for him. He responded in a daze that he felt the same, and shortly after, she fell fast asleep in his arms, a rare moment of perfect peace. After a moment's hesitation, he couldn't help but brush back her hair and give her a gentle kiss on the forehead before carefully slipping away. The days began to drift by, and as they did, Luna's art commissions grew more frequent. She even started learning how to create animated emojis. She turned their life into a serialized comic about a cicada official and a little white kitten, while Marcus continued to find his footing in social media. He spent his hours filming the meticulous process of model modification, teaching himself the ropes of short-form video production as he went. Though the engagement numbers were still quite low, it was, at the very least, a start. Then, one day, Leo called him over on a workday. Leo claimed it was an emergency, and as Marcus prepared to leave, Luna clung to the doorframe as she always did, asking if he would really come back. He teased her, waving his phone and joking that if she was that worried about him running off, he might as well just stay home forever. She laughed and told him to hurry back, but when he arrived at the shop, Leo looked incredibly mysterious about his emergency plans. Leo decided it was time to turn Marcus into a true professional, not just someone making models, but someone with a complete business mindset. When asked about his goal, Marcus admitted he just wanted a stable life where he could relax, but Leo told him that path would never lead to security. And so, Leo began his lecture, covering everything from time card theories to attention economics and how to carve out a unique niche in the market. Leo asked why he had chosen this path in college if he truly loved these things, and after a brief pause, Marcus shared his childhood obsession with models. Leo laughed, realizing Marcus was a true geek at heart, though Marcus was quick to point out that Leo was the last person who should be joking. Marcus's gaze sharpened with sudden focus. Leo noticed the change, straightened up, and tossed him a new model base to get to work. Leo told him to figure things out himself, as he couldn't always be there to guide him. On the way home, Marcus fiddled with the model base. He wondered if his boss had seen this path for him all along. Meanwhile, Luna and her friend Sarah, who happened to be Leo's friend too, were chatting away on their phones. Luna began telling our story from the very beginning, holding nothing back as she typed. She described how she had watched Marcus from the shadows near the funeral parlor and how she had finally found the courage to hold an umbrella over his head, eventually using every excuse to lure him home. Sarah nearly jumped off her sofa in shock at the tale. What Marcus didn't realize, of course, was that Luna's best friend and his eccentric boss were actually the same person. Then, one day, news reached them that Grandma Rose had been hospitalized after a fall. Marcus rushed Luna to the hospital, where they found the old woman lying in bed with her leg in a cast. The moment Luna saw her, the tears began to flow. "Grandma, I'm here," she sobbed, spinning her wheelchair toward the bed. Grandma Rose then pressed a bankbook into Marcus's hand. He would later learn that it contained all the money Luna's own grandmother had saved over the years, plus Rose's own contributions, nearly $30,000 in total. Luna wept uncontrollably when she saw the book. They had always told her there was no money for her treatment, yet here it was, all along. Marcus found himself at a loss for words. Later, however, Luna made a decision that caught him completely off guard. She held the bankbook out to him and told him to decide how to use it. He hesitated, asking why she was giving it to him. She insisted that since he was the one taking care of her, he should manage it. It was her way of showing her trust and approval. She whispered that she wasn't sure if her approval meant much to him, but Marcus remained silent for a long time before finally accepting it. He gave her a playful flick on the forehead and told her not to regret it. Luna immediately began backing her wheelchair away, as if trying to distance herself from the money. She told him he was the one who wasn't allowed to back out, or she'd be furious. She turned her head away with a huff of feigned arrogance, though to be honest, it looked much more like she was just acting cute. Marcus promised he wouldn't change his mind. As he tucked the bankbook away, he realized his greatest luck in life started on that one rainy night, when a girl in a wheelchair had reached out to shield him from the storm. And in that moment, Luna leaned into his arms. Luna whispered softly that she wanted to keep drawing their story forever, everything from the present moment to whatever the future might hold. Marcus gently ruffled her hair as the autumn wind outside began to grow cold, though the warmth in his arms was just right. That night, he lay in bed tossing and turning, while Luna curled against his chest like a small, sleeping animal. Suddenly, his phone buzzed with a message from Leo. The boss asked if he was free to come in and finish a project, promising a permanent position if he did. Marcus looked at the girl in his arms, then back at his phone. Early the next morning, he prepared breakfast, left a note, and headed out. Luna leaned against the doorframe, sweetly telling her husband to come home early. He didn't look back, but his smile was already stretching from ear to ear. As he pedaled his shared bike toward the shop, the wind felt chilly against his clothes, but his heart remained warm. Arriving at the store, he found a sign on the rolling shutter that said, "Don't hurry, recording in progress," with a small arrow pointing downward. There sat a small stool and a dog bowl with a little sign labeled, "Reserved for Marcus," right next to a crooked sack of peanuts. He stared at the dog bowl with a deadpan expression, feeling more like a stray than an employee. It wasn't until after 10 that Leo finally strolled in, carrying a massive breakfast and looking unusually drained of his usual energy. Uncle Marcus had arrived quite early, looking rather worse for wear. Leo couldn't help but ask if he, too, had been caught in some sort of explosive ambush, explaining that his best friend's recent romantic news had kept him awake all night. Marcus realized then that they were both dealing with love-related stress. After eating, Leo dragged him to an internet cafe to vent and play games. During the day, work mostly consisted of keeping the boss company while he played games and chatted. After work, Marcus would head home to build models, film videos, and care for Luna. Luna wasn't idle either. Her art was improving rapidly, commissions were pouring in, and she even started researching how to make animated emojis. They leaned on each other, occasionally driving one another crazy. Sometimes things were sickeningly sweet, and other times they fought until the world shook. Yet after every argument, they grew closer. She would shrink into a timid ball when he was angry, but use the most clumsy ways to comfort him when he was down. In turn, he patiently guided her through her insecurities, even when her antics made him lose his temper. He often thought of throwing her out, but he could never bring himself to do it. One evening, as Luna worked at her drawing board, and Marcus sat nearby sanding down a model, she suddenly turned around. Her wide, round eyes were fixed on him, looking as though she were about to throw a summer tantrum. He glanced at her screen and saw a drawing of a lazy owner lying flat, while in the distance, a lonely little kitten huddled before a drawing board, surrounded by dark, heavy shadows. With a smile, he moved her closer so she could lean against him while she worked. Luna quieted down instantly, even sneaking a little hard onto the kitten's head. He finally reached his limit, pulling her into his arms and turning her toward him. Luna looked like a startled kitten, holding her pen, her eyes blinking rapidly in surprise. But he knew he had to wait until she could stand on her own, resist, and choose for herself. He wanted her to be able to live by her own strength, to cast aside her insecurities and the chaos of her past. Only then would her love be a choice made with true confidence, free from any sense of obligation. To him, this was a matter of both responsibility and respect. Luna's mouth parted slightly, a new kind of flicker dancing in her eyes as she processed his words. She stared at him in a daze for a long time before nodding firmly. She thanked him for treating her this way, though he felt there was really no need for thanks. He gently tapped her forehead, but she insisted. She could feel that he cherished her, perhaps even more than she cherished herself. She mentioned that he reminded her of her grandmother, and that if her grandmother knew she had found him, she would be so happy. He agreed that she surely would be. Outside, the wind grew a bit colder, but the warmth in his arms remained as steady as ever. And so, our story continues. Luna declared her intention to draw everything, their present, their future, and whatever might come. Meanwhile, Marcus focused on how to make their daily life better, both for her sake and his own. As for what the future held, no one could say for sure, but for now, he had no intention of letting go. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Leo, demanding he show up for a big project tomorrow or face a pay cut in peanuts. He looked at Luna, who had already fallen asleep in his arms. He gently tucked a stray hair behind her ear and sent a quick reply that he'd be there. Yet, as he headed out the next day, a sense of guilt began to gnaw at him. He had promised Luna they would visit Grandma together. Before bed, the two of them huddled under the covers for a long time, discussing how to spend their money and planning a trip to the bookstore. He wanted to buy her some reference books for her art. After a bit of gentle persuasion, and perhaps a few white lies, he finally convinced her. Luna finally steeled her heart and agreed to use her current earnings to improve her skills, though this meant the burden of their daily life fell back on him. Marcus felt the weight on his shoulders. Even though Luna had a small monthly subsidy and that heavy savings passbook for backup, he knew better. He told himself that money was strictly off limits. The subsidy was for emergencies, and the nearly $30,000 in the passbook couldn't be touched. Setting aside her grandmother's portion, even if the book was in his hands, only Luna had the right to decide how to use it. But there was more. The most difficult part was the $10,000 that Grandma Sarah had secretly tucked inside. That money had to stay put until he could ask her why. He needed to speak with Grandma Sarah face to face before deciding whether to keep it or return it. The problem was, he had just stood her up. If everything had gone according to plan, these matters might have been settled today. But instead, he had chosen to prioritize his so-called career. To be honest, this job felt unreliable from start to finish. Yet deep down, he had leaned toward this choice anyway. He knew what he needed. He was trapped in a financial corner, and he suspected only his wealthy young boss, Leo, could provide the answers he was looking for. Despite having made his choice, every step he took toward work was haunted by flashes of memory. He kept seeing Grandma Sarah in his mind. He remembered her frantic search for Luna, her warm smile when bringing them food, and how she worried about their meals even from her hospital bed. He recalled her final, touching gesture as she turned away. He wondered if he had made a mistake, shaking his head with a bitter smile. He hoped he could finish early and take Luna to the hospital soon. Before he knew it, he was standing at the shop door, nearly tripping over something. There sat Leo, sporting heavy dark circles and staring at him with a look of pure resentment. As Marcus pushed the door open, they locked eyes in silence. The silence stretched on until Marcus finally spoke up, asking why the boss had called him in such a desperate hurry and if something was wrong. Leo twisted his body like a character from a zombie movie, briefly sitting up before collapsing back down onto the desk. It was a pathetic sight, really. Burying his face in a pillow, Leo's voice came out muffled, telling Marcus to be quiet and let him rest. He then asked where the food was. Marcus glanced at the empty table and mentioned the portrait. This seemed to trigger something, as Leo suddenly snapped, shouting that the drawing was exactly what was bothering him. Leo let out a groan and buried his face back into the pillow, muttering that the old lady who sells breakfast didn't show up today. He was currently waiting for a delivery. Marcus pointed out there were plenty of other stalls nearby, but Leo was fixated on that specific one. When asked why, Leo snapped at him to mind his own business. Marcus simply sighed, feeling a genuine sense of worry for the old woman. He knew she had cardiovascular issues for years. Usually, if she didn't show up, it meant she was back in the hospital. He couldn't help but wonder. He let out an involuntary sigh. Having just dealt with Grandma Sarah's situation, and with the memory of his parents still fresh, he was sensitive to such topics. He mused that the world would be better without disease. Leo shifted his gaze, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes as if he'd grown a second head. Marcus felt a bit creeped out by the stare. Leo finally remarked that hearing such naive, youthful fantasies from an old man like him was quite a surprise. He jokingly asked if Marcus was aging backward. Once the delivery arrived, the two of them focused entirely on eating until the very last bite was gone. Only then did Marcus return to the main point, asking why he had been summoned so urgently. Leo's expression shifted as if he were about to speak, but the words seemed to get stuck. Seeing Marcus's gaze grow increasingly suspicious, Leo suddenly stood up and grabbed him, telling him to just shut up and follow. We see the two of them cross the street and duck into an old, narrow alleyway. It was crowded with small shops sporting faded, weather-beaten signs. Steam rose from roadside stalls where workers in overalls sat on low stools, eating breakfast in small groups. As they entered, the locals seemed to know Leo. Several people greeted him warmly. He waved them off with a smile, saying he'd already eaten, while pointing toward a specific corner of the alley. He indicated an empty spot where the old lady usually set up her stall. Marcus looked over and saw nothing but a few lonely items left behind. There were some folding tables and chairs, all tightly bound together with thick hemp rope. The equipment sat there, silent and unused, looking quite sturdy despite its age. Leo mentioned that the owner who usually packed up the stall was someone he knew, a woman named Grandma Sarah, who used to live right here. Hearing that name, combined with the lingering, familiar scent of the alley, Marcus felt a strange, unsettling sensation growing in his chest. Leo continued his story, mentioning he had a friend who used to wait here for family after school. He had tagged along a few times back then. He eventually grew used to the flavors of this place. Later, after graduating from college, he decided to open his own shop right next door. He discovered the old lady had moved away long ago, yet the stall remained, the flavors unchanged, and the prices stayed the same. For years, nothing shifted until one day she failed to show up for several days straight. It was a worrying sign, to be sure. When she finally returned, Leo learned her health was failing. Marcus asked if he knew where she had moved to now. The answer was Sunshine Apartments, the very place where Sarah lived. Suddenly, we see all the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. If Grandma Sarah's health had been failing all along, then her desperate, somewhat questionable attempts to set Marcus up with Sarah make sense. In her eyes, she was likely settling her final affairs. The more Marcus thought about it, the more his heart began to race with anxiety. Yesterday's frail state probably wasn't caused by her fall. Rather, the fall was just a symptom of a much deeper problem. She had likely moved to that area specifically for Sarah's sake, but there was no logical reason to keep her stall so far away. As Marcus scanned the workers lining the alley, he suddenly understood. At the front of the line stood several labor recruitment agencies. Men stood there anxiously, waiting for any work to be assigned. It was a scene Marcus knew all too well from his own past. His own father had once been one of them. He realized the old lady kept this distant stall open because she simply couldn't abandon these people. Continuing forward and turning a few corners, they found Leo stopping at an oil mill where an old man was hunched over working hard. Sweat dripped from the towel around the man's neck as he pulled the heavy wooden press. Leo greeted him with familiar warmth. He ordered a large sack of peanuts and a jar of peanut butter. When it came time to pay, the old man quoted a suspiciously low price. Leo, however, wasn't having it and began talking utter nonsense, insisting that 150 plus 15 clearly equaled 315. He quickly slapped down over $300 and bolted, leaving Marcus stunned as he lugged the incredibly heavy sack outside. The thing weighed at least 80 pounds, heavier than Sarah herself. On the way back, Leo ducked into a convenience store for more shopping. He emerged muttering about how the old man had annoyingly bought a calculator. Marcus nearly choked on his own breath at the absurdity. He was beginning to understand why Leo had hired him. The man seemingly extended this same whim to anyone he saw struggling. Marcus wondered just how many of these whims his boss had acted on, but Leo simply told him to shut up and keep moving. Leo teased him, comparing him to a stray cat, bold enough to act, but too shy to admit it, before ordering him to haul the goods back to the shop. He told Marcus to disappear for the day once finished. Back at the shop, Leo flopped onto the sofa and made a sudden announcement. He promised Marcus a permanent position immediately. Suddenly, being a laborer felt worth it as Marcus spent 2 hours finishing the basic 3D models Leo requested. Leo beamed with joy at the fresh models, looking like a child with a new toy. Then came the big question, the salary for his new permanent role. He asked Marcus how much he wanted, 6, 7, or even 8,000. His eyes were bright with genuine anticipation as he waited for an answer. Marcus eventually asked for 4,000, though he felt he didn't deserve it. That extra 1,000 meant he and Sarah could finally eat their fill every day. Leo looked at him as if he were a complete idiot for asking so little, but he agreed instantly and even tossed in a few extra models as a bonus. Marcus left the shop in high spirits, but he hadn't gone far when his phone buzzed. A notification appeared on the screen. It was a transfer for $1,000. He stared at the number for a long time, clutching the models, trying to suppress the messy thoughts swirling in his head. Yet, a strange sense of unease began to creep into his heart. Leo's casual, boundary-blurring behavior was starting to weigh on him. He couldn't forget the physical closeness of the day. While Leo likely just saw him as a brother, Marcus found it harder and harder not to overthink things. He shook his head violently to clear his mind. To be honest, he was terrified of where his own thoughts were drifting. He knew he wasn't like the innocent Sarah. He would rather crush himself into dust than allow himself to cause her even a moment of pain. By the time he reached the apartment, it was after 2 in the afternoon. The guilt of standing Sarah up and his confusing feelings for Leo felt like heavy stones. But the thought of the little girl waiting for him at home made his heart race with panic. He hammered on the elevator button, desperate to get upstairs. When he reached the door, he knocked frantically, but there was only silence. He searched the entire complex before the security guard finally gave him a lead. Apparently, Sarah had taken a taxi about 2 hours ago with an elderly man. Marcus assumed she had gone to the hospital with Grandpa George. But leaving without a single word was completely unlike her. Then, a realization hit him. Her phone might have run out of credit. He felt like a fool for not realizing it sooner. He quickly topped up her account and dialed her number, his heart in his throat. A weak, tearful voice finally answered. Sarah sobbed that her phone had died, and she had been trying to reach him ever since she left. She sobbed that her messages wouldn't go through and kept apologizing, but Marcus quickly reassured her that as long as she was safe, nothing else mattered. When he asked where she was, she told him she was at the hospital because Grandma Rose had passed away. Those words hit him like ice, freezing him in his tracks. Sarah wasn't hysterical. There was only a haunting, absolute calm in her voice. She explained that Grandpa George had called her to say her final goodbyes. They were currently processing the paperwork for the cremation. She asked him simply if he was coming, her voice small and distant. By the time Marcus rushed to the hospital, he found Sarah sitting by the bed, her small hands tightly clutching Grandma Rose's cold, lifeless fingers. When she turned her head, her eyes were red and swollen, flickering with a faint spark of life only when they finally landed on him. He told her she didn't have to be brave anymore, and she finally collapsed into his arms, sobbing silently until the sun began to set. After seeing off Grandpa George and collecting the ashes from the crematorium, Sarah seemed to settle, but the question she asked next was heartbreaking. She asked if everyone who loved her was destined to leave, wondering aloud if Marcus would one day disappear from her life as well. He wanted to give her an immediate answer, but for some reason, the words seemed to catch in his throat, leaving him momentarily silent. He tried to lighten the mood, joking that since he was so much older, he would naturally be the one to leave first. To be honest, it wasn't his best joke. He quickly cut the conversation short to stop her from overthinking, pushing her wheelchair toward the coast as the northern wind began to pick up. Sarah huddled in her chair, shivering slightly in the cold, so Marcus draped his jacket over her head. She tried to give it back, but he wouldn't hear of it. He told her firmly to keep it on, insisting that while he couldn't fix her heart, he could at least keep her body warm for the time being. When they reached the bridge near the lighthouse, he turned her toward the sea. Sarah opened the urn and began scattering the ashes, handful by handful. Her movements grew faster, almost like a farmer sowing seeds. When he asked if she wanted to keep some, she said she didn't want Grandma worrying about her anymore. In the end, she kept just a tiny amount. Later, he took her down to the beach and held her so her feet could touch the sand. He watched as she felt the earth beneath her, a small moment of connection with the world she had been separated from for so long. In that moment, we see how captivating she is when her insecurity fades. He realized that many of their problems might vanish the day she could finally stand on her own. Under the soft glow of the moonlight, the two of them sat together like statues, finding a brief, silent peace in each other's company. After standing there like statues for a long time, Summer whispered that she wanted to go into the sea, asking if Marcus would lead her there step by step. He held her close, supporting her weight as they moved forward slowly, and in those few short steps, the invisible distance between them began to vanish. As they reached the water's edge, Summer struggled to dip her feet in, shivering violently from the cold, which was to be expected, really. Despite the chill, she was overjoyed, insisting she wanted to go deeper. Suddenly, she wasn't bothered by the cold at all, leaving Marcus to sigh as he rolled up his trousers. They waded in until the water reached her calves, and then she asked him quietly if he would ever leave her. He promised he wouldn't. She pressed further, asking what would happen if someone better came along. Again, he assured her that his answer remained the same. She painted a picture of a woman who was beautiful, successful, tall, and wealthy, someone who could offer him everything. To be honest, she was overthinking it. Marcus joked that even if such a person existed, they wouldn't be interested in him, but Summer's eyes dimmed, and his smile quickly faded. He suddenly realized that such a person actually did exist in his past, but he repeated his promise. Summer remained silent for a moment, then suddenly pushed his chest. Caught off guard, he fell backward, his instincts kicking in as he pulled her with him. They both tumbled into the freezing seawater together. A cold wave crashed over them without warning, dragging them under. But in that split second before he closed his eyes, she reached out to him. She kissed him with a clumsy, desperate passion that pulled him into a daze, lasting until the air in their lungs was gone and the tide finally receded. Marcus emerged coughing and sputtering, scrambling to pull Summer up, only for her to smile and whisper that she was addicted to the feeling. He told her she was crazy, and they headed home. After taking turns in the shower, Summer curled up in his clothes, clinging to him tightly. We see them talking late into the night about the future, about marriage, her desire to learn to cook, and her dreams of a normal life. She imagined waiting for him after work and running together. She asked if he would love her even more once she could finally walk again. He told her he would love her no matter what. With that, she decided it was time to start her leg exercises. And so, their days began to brighten. As time passed, Summer's art commissions grew, while Marcus explored social media. One day, his friend Leo dragged him to a cosplay convention. Leo transformed Marcus from a scruffy office worker into a stylish character. At the event, Leo went all out cosplaying as Android 18. Marcus, dressed as a popular swordsman, was surprised when people actually started approaching him for photos. It was quite a change of pace. The photographer kept asking him to look more cheerful, and when a guy tried to flirt with Leo, Marcus instinctively stepped in to block him. During lunch, a girl with pink hair approached them and offered Marcus an orange. He felt a strange sense of familiarity, though he couldn't quite place her. He racked his brain trying to remember where they had met, but the realization only hit him the moment she started to speak. It turned out she was his first love from a brief one-week romance that had started with a dare, a kiss that had left him feeling broke and insecure. Back then, his panic had led to a messy, confused breakup. Now, she seemed to be doing quite well, owning her own home and looking very successful. She even hinted at wanting to support him financially, but he simply told her that the past was the past, while Leo watched the drama unfold with great interest. Afterward, Leo was desperate for the gossip, so Marcus confessed the whole story. Leo sighed, remarking that Marcus failed to make money simply because he wasn't shameless enough. He noted that the space for true creators was being squeezed tight. Marcus wondered if his personality was really the problem. He asked if being shameless was truly what he was missing. It was a fair question, all things considered.